Episode 3 of 8. The world behind the words, ancient culture, desert survival, and the archaeology of grace. The God of the Bible is not a God who operates in abstract theological space, removed from the texture of physical life. He is the God who meets Abraham in the heat of the day. He is the God who speaks in desert wind and burning bush. He is the God who enters human history not by bypassing the material world but by working through it with a precision and intentionality that only becomes visible to those who are willing to study the cultural and physical context in which his revelation occurred. To read the Bible without understanding the world in which it was written is to read music without understanding the instruments on which it was composed. You can follow the basic melody, but the full harmonic richness is inaccessible. Genesis 22 verses 20 through 24 is set in a specific physical world, a world of desert geography, ancient family law, and survival economics that shapes every word of the text. When we understand that world, the theological content of the passage deepens immeasurably. So let us spend this episode in the archaeology of grace, moving through the physical landscape and cultural structures of the ancient Near East until the ground beneath Abraham's feet becomes so real that we can feel it under our own. The region in which Nahor and his family lived, the region to which the Arameans gave their name, was located in what scholars call Upper Mesopotamia or Aram Naharaim, Aram of the two rivers. This is the fertile triangle of land defined by the great Euphrates River flowing from the northwest and its eastern tributary the Khabur flowing down from the mountains of southeastern Turkey, meeting in the region that is today divided between northern Syria and southeastern Turkey. The city of Haran, which is mentioned in the broader patriarchal narrative as the place where Abraham's father Terah stopped on the journey from Ur and where Abraham himself lingered before receiving the final call to move on to Canaan, was located within this region, and scholars have now identified with considerable confidence the city of Nahor mentioned in Genesis 24 with the ancient city of Nakur or Nahur referenced in the 18th century cuneiform archives discovered at the ancient city of Mari on the Euphrates. The climate of this region in the second millennium before Christ was what geographers classify as semi-arid continental, characterized by cold wet winters with temperatures dropping well below freezing and hot dry summers when the sun beats the landscape into parched dust. Annual rainfall in the more favored parts of the region averaged between 200 and 400 millimeters, placing it in the zone of marginal but possible rain-fed agriculture. In the drier margins in the open steppe country, rainfall dropped below what grain agriculture required, and the population practiced transhumant pastoralism, moving their flocks and herds seasonally between the well-watered highland pastures of the spring and early summer and the lowland river valleys where agriculture was possible and wells were accessible in the dry season. The extended family was not merely a social convenience in this world. It was a survival mechanism. The Hebrew concept of the Beit Av, the house of the father, which in its most literal sense means simply a household but in its full social meaning means an extended family unit encompassing multiple generations living and working together, was the fundamental unit of economic production, social security, military defense, and religious practice all in one. To be separated from one's Beit Av, as Abraham had been separated from his when he left Haran at God's command, was not merely an emotional experience of displacement. It was a genuine reduction in economic capacity, social protection, and cultural identity. This is why the report that arrives after the Akedah carries such weight. It is reconnecting Abraham not merely sentimentally but structurally to the wider kinship network from which his calling had separated him. The Nuzi tablets, which I introduced briefly in our first episode, deserve extended treatment here because they are perhaps the single most valuable archaeological discovery for understanding the social and legal world of the patriarchs. The Nuzi archive consists of several thousand cuneiform clay tablets discovered at the site of ancient Nuzi, located near the modern Iraqi city of Kirkuk, during excavations conducted in the 1920s and 1930s. These tablets date from approximately the 15th century before Christ, somewhat later than the generally accepted period of the patriarchs, but they preserve legal and social customs that scholars agree reflect practices with deep roots in the earlier second millennium. The people whose legal archives these tablets represent were the Hurrians, a population group that was prominent throughout northern Mesopotamia during the patriarchal period and whose customs show striking parallels with the patriarchal narratives. Among the most illuminating of the Nuzi tablet collections are those dealing with inheritance, adoption, and the legal status of secondary wives. The Nuzi texts reveal that in the ancient Near Eastern household, a pilagesh, a secondary wife or concubine, occupied a legally defined position that was distinct from but not equivalent to that of the primary wife. The pilagesh typically did not bring a full dowry to the marriage and her sons did not automatically inherit on equal terms with the sons of the primary wife. However, and this is crucial for our understanding of Genesis 22 verse 24, the sons of a pilagesh were legally recognized members of the household. They were not illegitimate children in any meaningful legal sense of that word. They were acknowledged sons with defined rights, even if those rights were hierarchically secondary to the rights of the sons of the primary wife. The Code of Hammurabi, the famous Babylonian law code carved in its entirety on a 2.25-meter high black diorite stele, copies of which have been found at multiple ancient Near Eastern sites since the original was discovered at Sosha in 1901, contains several paragraphs dealing specifically with the legal relationships between primary wives, secondary wives, and their respective offspring. Paragraphs 170 and 171 deal with the inheritance rights of sons born to a man's slave girl when the man has also acknowledged those sons as his own, and the legal reasoning in these paragraphs illuminates the social world in which the mention of Reumah the concubine and her 4 sons is embedded. The Torah's inclusion of Reumah's sons by name, treating them with the same textual dignity as the sons of Milcah the primary wife, is therefore not a culturally revolutionary gesture but it is a theologically significant one. The text is encoding a principle of divine inclusivity within the conventions of the human social world it inhabits. The physical construction of a household in this region during the patriarchal period has been illuminated by extensive archaeological excavation at sites including Ebla, Tel Halaf, Tel Brak, and numerous smaller sites throughout the Syrian steppe country. The typical construction was of sun-dried mud brick, made from the alluvial clay of the river valleys mixed with chopped straw as a structural binder and dried in the intense summer sun for several weeks before being used. The bricks were stacked in courses with mud mortar between the courses, and the walls were typically plastered with a smooth coat of mud plaster that both weathered the rain and provided a surface that could be whitewashed or decorated. The flat roofs were constructed from wooden beams, typically of poplar or willow from the river margins, laid across the tops of the walls and covered with a thick layer of reeds and then packed mud. In the hot dry summers, families slept on their rooftops to catch the cooler night air. The central feature of such a compound was the open courtyard, which served as the primary workspace during daylight hours. Women ground grain in the courtyard using the saddle quern, the basalt grinding stone consisting of a flat lower stone and a rounded upper stone that the grinder pushed back and forth with both hands, bending over the stone in a posture that, as physical anthropologists have documented from the skeletal remains of women who performed this work regularly, produced characteristic arthritis in the knees, hips, and wrists. The labor required to produce enough flour for a family's daily bread was enormous, typically 2 to 3 hours of hard physical work per day for the women of the household. This is the household in which Rebecca was born and raised. This is the physical context of her formation. The bride of the covenant son was shaped not in ease and luxury but in the daily labor of a mud brick compound in the semi-arid steppe of Upper Mesopotamia. Water, in this world, was not taken for granted. The typical household in the region of Paddan Aram depended on wells for its water supply, and the construction and maintenance of a well was one of the most significant investments a household or community could make. Wells were dug by hand, typically to depths of 10 to 30 meters through the limestone and chalk of the regional geology, and lined with dry stone courses to prevent collapse. The well was covered with a large flat stone when not in use, both to prevent contamination and to prevent the loss of precious water through evaporation in the fierce summer heat. Water was lifted from the well using water skins made from the cleaned and tanned hide of a goat, with the leg openings tied off and the neck used as the opening through which water was poured into the skin and later poured out. A properly cured goatskin water skin could last for many years if treated regularly with animal fat to prevent drying and cracking. The well was the social center of the ancient village, the place where women gathered daily to draw water, where news was exchanged, where relationships were formed and maintained, and where the character of individuals was on full public display. This is why the great covenant moments in the biblical narrative so consistently take place at wells. Rebecca will be seen at her well. Jacob will meet Rachel at her well. Moses will meet Zipporah at her well. Jesus will meet the Samaritan woman at her well. The well is not merely a convenient plot device. It is a theological location, a place of encounter, a place where daily necessity and divine appointment intersect. Understanding all of this physical and cultural context, the mud brick and the grinding stone and the water skin and the well, does not reduce the theological significance of Genesis 22 verses 20 through 24. It amplifies it. When we understand that Rebecca is being formed in this world, in the specific physical environment of hard labor and scarce water and extended family networks and desert survival, we understand more fully what the text means when it says that she emerges from Bethel, the house of God. The house of God is not a palace. It is a mud brick compound in the Syrian steppe. The bride of the covenant son is not formed in ease. She is formed in daily faithfulness to the grinding stone and the well. And this is precisely the theological point. The God who is preparing a bride for the covenant son in this genealogy is the same God who will later become incarnate in a stable in Bethlehem and grow up in a carpenter's workshop in Nazareth. He does not despise the ordinary. He does not require magnificent environments to accomplish magnificent purposes. He hides his greatest preparations in the most ordinary containers, and the ordinary containers are precisely what he chooses because they reveal most clearly that the power belongs to God and not to the vessel. Let this truth settle into your life today. You do not need to be in an impressive environment for God to be forming you. You do not need to be in a prominent position for God to be preparing you. If your life feels like a mud brick compound in the Syrian steppe right now, if you are grinding grain and drawing water in the daily labor of obscure faithfulness, then know this, you are being formed in the house of God. You are being prepared in exactly the kind of environment in which the greatest divine purposes have always been prepared. If this archaeological and theological immersion has deepened your love for the Bible and its world, please subscribe, like this video, and share it widely. Contact us at christ4life143@gmail.com. Stay tuned for the next video. Join us next time as we continue verse by verse.